Pay $35,000 or do not bother showing up to the wedding. My parents warned me with eyes cold as ice. My sister scoffed and said she is nothing without family money anyway. I just smiled and sipped my wine. That night I spent exactly $35,000 on a one-way first-class ticket to the Maldives. The next morning their accounts were frozen, their cards were declined, the power to their house was cut, and I had 69 missed calls while I watched the ocean. My name is Zora, and I am 32 years old. I work as a venture capital fund manager in Chicago, but to my family I am nothing more than a walking ATM with a pulse. Before I tell you how I brought my entitled family to their knees, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of the family, simply because you refuse to be their doormat. The nightmare began last Friday at Le Grand, one of the most expensive French restaurants in the city. The air smelled of truffle oil and old money. I sat across from my younger sister Keisha, her fiancé Julian, and our parents. Keisha was glowing, or maybe that was just the reflection of the 3-carat diamond on her finger that I knew Julian could not actually afford. Julian was a social media influencer with more followers than dollars in his bank account. He sat there swirling his Pinot Noir like he owned the vineyard, grinning at me with that slick, predatory smile I had come to loathe. We had just finished the main course when the waiter approached our table. He held a thick cream-colored envelope on a silver tray. He did not place it in the center of the table. He did not place it in front of my father. He placed it directly in front of me. I frowned and looked at my father. Dad usually made a big show of grabbing the check to maintain his image as the patriarch, even though I had been quietly paying off his gambling debts for 5 years. "Open it, Zora." My mother urged, her voice dripping with a sweetness that usually preceded a request for money. I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. Inside was not a bill for our dinner. It was an itemized invoice, not from the restaurant but from a wedding planner. My eyes scanned the list. Custom Vera Wang gown, $12,000. Imported Ecuadorian roses, $8,000. Deposit for a honeymoon suite in Bora Bora, $15,000. The total at the bottom was exactly $35,000. I looked up confused. Is this a joke? Keisha let out a giggle that sounded more like a hiss. Do not be silly, Zora. Since you are the maid of honor and the only one without a husband and kids to worry about, we thought it would be a nice gesture for you to cover the essentials. Consider it an early wedding gift. I felt the blood drain from my face. Essentials. She called a $12,000 dress essential. I looked at Julian. He was busy inspecting his cuticles, pretending this conversation had nothing to do with him. I placed the paper back on the table and smoothed it out with my hand. I am not paying this, I said calmly. The silence at the table was instant and heavy. The clinking of silverware from other tables seemed to stop. My mother's smile vanished. Excuse me. I said no. I am already paying for the venue deposit, which was $10,000. I am not paying another $35,000 so Keisha can play princess and Julian can pretend he is rich. Julian finally looked up, his face flushing a mottled red. Hey now, Zora. No need to be rude, we all know you have the liquidity. You run a VC fund, for God's sake. Family helps family. It is what we do. I let out a dry laugh. Family helps family. Funny, I do not remember any of you helping me when I was eating ramen noodles in my dorm room, working 3 jobs to put myself through college. I do not remember any help when I bought my first apartment. The only time this family helps is when they are helping themselves to my bank account. That is enough, my father boomed. His voice was so loud that the couple at the table next to us jumped. He slammed his hand onto the white tablecloth, making the crystal wine glasses rattle dangerously. You are selfish, Zora, my father spat, his eyes bulging. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And now you want to embarrass your sister over a few $1,000s. You think you are better than us because you got lucky in the stock market. But let me tell you something. Without this family, you are nothing. You are a sad, lonely woman with money and no one to share it with. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, the familiar ache of never being good enough unless I was writing a check. I looked at Keisha, waiting for her to defend me. She just rolled her eyes and took a sip of her drink. Dad is right, Zora, Keisha said, her voice dripping with disdain. Stop making a scene. Just pay the bill. Unless you want to be uninvited. Frankly, nobody wants a stingy buzzkill at the wedding anyway. My father leaned in close, his face inches from mine. He lowered his voice to a menacing growl. Here is the deal, Zora. You pay that invoice by tomorrow noon, or do not bother showing up to the wedding. In fact, if you do not pay, do not bother coming home for Christmas or Thanksgiving either. You will be dead to us. I looked around the table. My mother was nodding in agreement. Julian was smirking, looking at me like I was a bug he wanted to squash. Keisha looked bored. They truly believed I would fold. They thought I was desperate for their approval. They thought the fear of being cut off would make me open my wallet one more time. I took a deep breath and picked up my purse. I looked my father dead in the eye. Is that a promise? I asked quietly. Pay up or get out, Zora, he sneered. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply smoothed down my dress and looked at the waiter who was hovering nearby, looking terrified. Split the check for the dinner. 5 ways, please, I told the waiter loud enough for the table to hear. I will pay for my salad. They can handle the rest. I turned and walked out of the restaurant. Behind me I heard my father shouting my name, but I did not look back. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally letting go. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I took out my phone. I had a flight to book, and I had a banking app to open. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would show them exactly what happens when the stranger holding the purse strings decides to cut them off. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as the humiliation of the restaurant scene replayed in my mind on an endless loop. I foolishly hoped that my departure would serve as a wake-up call for my parents, that perhaps silence would force them to reflect on their entitlement. I was wrong. The next morning I received a text from my mother. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the scene caused at dinner. It simply read, "Meet us at Bella Sposa at 10 o'clock. We are willing to move past your outburst if you come support your sister." Against my better judgment, I went. I told myself it was for peace, but deep down, I think I wanted one last confirmation of who they really were before I pressed the nuclear button. Bella Sposa was the kind of bridal salon that served champagne and crystal flutes and required an appointment just to breathe their air. I arrived wearing my usual weekend uniform of high-quality leggings and an oversized cashmere hoodie. It was comfortable and expensive, but to the untrained eye, I looked like I had just rolled out of bed. The sales associate, a woman named Chloe, who apparently went to high school with Julian, looked me up and down with undisguised sneer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was lost. "I am here for the Freeman appointment," I said. She smirked. "Oh, you must be the sister. The changing rooms are in the back if you need to tidy up before the bride comes out." I swallowed the insult and sat on a velvet-tufted sofa. Moments later, my mother and Keisha swept in, followed closely by Julian. They were dressed to the nines, clearly trying to impress Chloe. My mother barely glanced at me. She was too busy cooing over the racks of silk and lace. Keisha disappeared into the dressing room and emerged 20 minutes later, wearing a gown that made everyone stop. It was stunning, I had to admit. Layers of imported silk organza, hand-stitched pearls, and a bodice that fit her perfectly. "It is the one," Keisha squealed, spinning around. "How much is it?" my mother asked, her eyes already darting toward me. $12,000, Chloe announced proudly. "It is a one-of-a-kind piece from Milan." My mother clasped her hands together. "Oh, Zora, look at your sister. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? This is the least we can do for her after the stress you caused last night." I felt a vein throb in my temple. Before I could speak, Julian stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch made my skin crawl. "You know, Zora," he said, his voice loud enough for the other customers to hear, "your parents sacrificed so much to put you through those fancy schools. They went without, so you could have everything. Buying this dress is a small price to pay to show some gratitude. Do not be the bitter spinster sister today. The audacity took my breath away. My parents had not paid a dime for my college. I worked 3 jobs and graduated with honors on a full scholarship, while they drained my savings account to pay off Dad's bookie. But looking at their expectant faces, I realized arguing was pointless. They had rewritten history to suit their narrative. I stood up and walked to the counter. "Fine," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Ring it up." Chloe beamed, vindicated in her assumption that I was just the bankroll. She tapped away at the register. "That will be $12,900 with tax." I reached into my bag and pulled out my black card. But as I did, I used my other hand to subtly unlock my phone in my pocket. I knew the banking app interface by heart. 1 tap on the security tab, 1 tap on freeze card. I slid the card across the marble counter. Chloe swiped it with a flourish. We waited. A sharp beep echoed through the silent shop. "Transaction declined," she said, her brow furrowing. She swiped it again, harder this time. "Declined." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Do you have another card?" she asked loudly. "This one has insufficient funds." The room went deadly silent. My mother gasped. Julian let out a harsh laugh. "I knew it," he scoffed. "I knew she was faking it. She probably leases that apartment too." My mother rushed over, her face purple with rage. "Zora, what is the meaning of this?" "Fix it. Fix it right now. You are embarrassing us." I took my card back from Chloe's hand. "I guess I am just a broke spinster after all," I said, shrugging. "Looks like you guys will have to figure this one out." "You did this on purpose!" Keisha screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her professional makeup. "You are jealous because I am getting married and you are alone. You want to ruin my life." I looked at my family, really looked at them. They looked ugly in their anger, distorted by greed. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt free. I turned my back on their screaming and walked out of the shop, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully as I stepped into the sunlight. My phone was already in my hand. It was time to head to the airport. I drove home in silence, the engine of my Range Rover, the only sound filling the space where my family's screams still echoed in my ears. The humiliation at the bridal shop had calcified into something colder and harder. It was no longer about a wedding dress or a dinner bill. It was about survival. I knew my family viewed me as their personal bank, but I needed to know the extent of the damage. I needed to see the numbers because numbers, unlike my mother, never lied. As soon as I walked into my penthouse, I kicked off my heels and poured a glass of ice water. I sat down at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I logged into the master dashboard of the Freeman Family Trust, a financial vehicle I had set up 5 years ago to ensure my parents would have a comfortable retirement and Keisha would have a safety net. I was the trustee, but I had given my parents limited access for emergencies. I navigated to the retirement portfolio first. My breath hitched. The graph that should have shown a steady upward trajectory was jagged, plummeting downward in steep, terrifying drops. I clicked on the transaction history. Withdrawal $10,000. Withdrawal $15,000. Withdrawal $20,000. The dates coincided perfectly with my father's disappearing acts on Friday nights. He had not just dipped into the pension fund I built for them. He had gutted it. Over $150,000 gone, wasted on horses, poker, and God knows what else. My hands trembled as I switched tabs to the real estate assets. I owned a beautiful vacation property on Martha's Vineyard, a place I hoped to retire to one day. I let my parents use it for summers, keeping the deed in my safe, but allowing them to hold copies of the keys and maintenance records. A red flag icon blinked next to the property address. Notice of lien. I clicked it, my heart pounding against my ribs. There was a home equity line of credit taken out against the house 3 months ago for $400,000. My signature was on the document, but I had never signed it. My mother had. She had forged my signature to leverage my property. And where did the money go? I followed the wire transfer trail. It led to a shell company called J. Miller Ventures LLC, Julian. My mother had mortgaged my future to fund Julian's non-existent business empire. I felt bile rise in my throat. This was not just entitlement. This was grand larceny. This was fraud committed by the people who gave birth to me. I needed one last piece of the puzzle. I needed to know if Julian was just incompetent or if he was malicious. I had set up a family cloud server years ago to share photos and documents. Julian, in his arrogance, had synced his devices to it when he moved in with Keisha, likely too lazy to pay for his own storage. I accessed his backup folder. There were thousands of selfies, screenshots of sneakers he could not afford, and drafts of emails. I clicked on a folder labeled Boys. There was an email chain from last week sent to his frat brothers. The subject line read, "The golden goose is cooked." I opened it and read the words that would seal his fate. "You would not believe these people," Julian wrote. "They are so desperate to be seen as high class, but they are just hood rich. The sister Zora is the only one with real capital. She is uptight and thinks she is smarter than everyone, but she is just another ATM. Once I marry Keisha, I will have access to the trust. I just need to play the loving son-in-law for a year or two. We will drain the account, sell the vineyard house, and then I am ghosting these stupid black people with money. Keisha is clueless. She will sign whatever I put in front of her." I stared at the screen. He called us stupid black people with money. He called my sister clueless. He admitted it was all a long con. A tear slid down my cheek, but I wiped it away furiously. Sadness was a luxury I could no longer afford. They had stolen from me. They had mocked me. They had racially abused their own heritage through their association with this predator. I took a screenshot of the email. I downloaded the forged mortgage documents. I exported the transaction history of the stolen pension fund. I saved everything to an encrypted external hard drive. Then I picked up my phone. I did not call my parents. I did not call Keisha to warn her. They had made their choice at the bridal shop. They chose the predator over the protector. I opened the airline app. I confirmed my seat to the Maldives. Then I opened my banking app again. I looked at the balance of the operating account my parents used for daily expenses, the one I replenished monthly. It was time to close the Bank of Zora permanently. The numbers had spoken, and they told me it was time to go to war. Saturday arrived, and with it came the invasion of my sanctuary. Despite the tension from the bridal shop and the secrets I had unearthed on my laptop, I was still forced to host Keisha's bachelorette party. My mother had insisted. She claimed that since I had the penthouse with the pool and the skyline view of the city, it was selfish of me to keep it to myself. So I opened my doors, determined to play the role of the dutiful sister one last time. I wanted to see how far they would go. I wanted to see if there was a single shred of decency left in any of them. By 3 in the afternoon, my pristine living room looked like a cheap Vegas nightclub had exploded inside it. Pink balloons arching over the doorway, plastic champagne flutes littering my marble countertops, and loud, bass-heavy pop music vibrating the floorboards. Keisha and her bridesmaids were by the pool shrieking and taking endless selfies. I was relegated to the background, functioning more as a hired caterer than the maid of honor. I refilled ice buckets. I wiped up spilled mimosas. I smiled tightly when Julian's female cousins made snide comments about the art on my walls, calling it pretentious. Around 4 o'clock, the heat outside became oppressive, so I retreated to the cool quiet of the sunroom adjacent to the kitchen to collect more napkins. The sunroom was separated from the main patio by thick glass sliding doors. They were tinted so you could not see in from the outside, but if the door was cracked just an inch, sound traveled perfectly. I was reaching for a stack of napkins when I heard my name. It was Mrs. Whiteman, Julian's mother, Linda. She was a woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and looked at my family like we were a charity project. She was swiftly losing patience with. Are you sure she is going to agree to it, Elaine? Linda asked, her voice low and sharp. We cannot have Julian living in some starter home. He needs an address that commands respect if his consulting firm is going to take off. I froze. My hand hovered over the napkins. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. My mother let out a dismissive laugh. Oh, do not worry about Zora. She is soft. She talks big like she did at the restaurant, but deep down she is desperate for our approval. Once the wedding is over and the emotions are high, I will sit her down. I will tell her that this house is too much for a single woman with no husband and no prospects. I felt a cold chill run down my spine despite the summer heat. And then what Linda pressed. Then we present the transfer of deed papers, my mother continued. We will frame it as a loan at first if we have to, or better yet, we tell her it is temporary while she travels for work. Once Julian and Keisha are moved in possession, is 9/10 of the law. Zora can move into that studio apartment on 4th Street, the one we used to rent out to college students. I nearly gagged. The studio on 4th Street was a run-down 300-square-foot box with faulty plumbing that I had been meaning to sell for years. They wanted to take my $3 million penthouse and shove me into a slum. But she owns this place, doesn't she? Linda asked, taking a sip of her drink. Technically, my mother said. But family money bought it, or at least that is what we tell people. Zora knows her place. She exists to support the legacy. Keisha is the one giving us grandchildren. Zora is just the financier. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting back tears of rage. I was not a daughter to her. I was a resource, a line item on a budget. The glass door slid open further, and I heard the slap of wet footsteps. It was Keisha. What are you guys talking about? She asked, breathless from laughter. Just discussing the living arrangements for after the honeymoon, sweetheart, Linda cooed. Your mother thinks Zora will be reasonable about the swap. Keisha let out a cruel, high-pitched giggle. The sound echoed in the small room. Oh, she better be. Honestly, what does she even need 5 bedrooms for? She is 32 years old. It is not like she is having kids anytime soon. She is practically ancient in market years. Let her go live in the studio. It fits her sad little life better. Julian needs a home office and I need a glam room. This place is wasted on her. My mother hummed in agreement. Exactly. She is old news. You are the future Keisha. I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the 3 women who were supposed to love me plot to dismantle my life. They were carving up my assets like vultures before I was even dead. The pain in my chest vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The final thread of guilt I had felt about leaving them stranded vanished. I did not storm out. I did not confront them. I simply backed away from the door, walked to the kitchen, and picked up the tray of appetizers. I walked out to the pool area, a bright fake smile plastered on my face. Here you go, ladies, I said, setting the tray down. Enjoy it. Keisha looked up at me, smirking. Thanks, Zora. Can you get me another towel? This one is wet. Sure thing, I said. I walked back inside, but I did not get a towel. Instead, I went to my office and locked the door. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my lawyer. Draft the eviction notice, I typed, and prepare the sale documents for the penthouse. I want it listed on Monday morning. Then I opened the airline app and checked my flight one last time. Departure was in 12 hours. It was time to give the bride and groom a wedding gift they would never forget. The morning after the bachelorette party, my penthouse looked like a war zone. Sticky residue from spilled cocktails coated my hardwood floors, and half-eaten canapes were smashed into my imported rugs. I woke up early, not to clean, but to wait. I knew the confrontation was coming. My mother and Keisha had crashed in the guest suites, and I sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee watching the clock. When they finally emerged around 10 in the morning, they did not look like family members who had just plotted to steal my home. They looked like hungover queens expecting room service. My mother sat at the kitchen island and massaged her temples. "Do be a dear and make us some breakfast, Zora," she said without opening her eyes. "And while the eggs are cooking, go ahead and make that transfer. The wedding coordinator is blowing up my phone. She says if she does not have the 35,000 by noon tomorrow, she is pulling the floral arrangements and the lighting." I took a slow sip of my coffee and set the mug down with a deliberate click. "No," I said. My mother opened one eye. "Excuse me." "I am not making breakfast," I said, my voice steady. "And I am not transferring $35,000. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Keisha shuffled into the room wrapped in one of my silk robes. "What is going on?" she mumbled. "Your sister is trying to ruin your wedding again," my mother spat, swiveling on the bar stool to face me. "Zora, we are done playing games. You heard what Julian said. This is about gratitude. You have the money sitting there doing nothing. Why are you being so spiteful?" "It is not about the money," I said, standing up. "It is about respect. You come into my home, you disrespect me, you demand I pay for a party I am barely welcome at, and behind my back you plot to take everything I have worked for." They froze. For a second I thought they realized I knew about the house scheme, but their arrogance blinded them. "You are delusional," Keisha scoffed. "Nobody is plotting against you. We just want you to do your part. If you do not pay, you are proving that you do not care about this family." "Then I guess I do not care," I said. "Now please get out of my house. I have a lot of cleaning to do." The screaming match that followed was predictable. There were tears from Keisha and threats from my mother. They called me selfish, bitter, and jealous. They told me I would die alone with my money. But finally they gathered their things and stormed out, slamming the heavy oak door so hard the walls shook. I spent the rest of the day in silence. I did not clean the mess. I just sat on my balcony looking at the city skyline, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew my father would be the closer. He was the hammer they used when guilt trips failed. At 8 in the evening, my phone buzzed on the glass table. It was a text message from my father. It was not a question. It was a decree. I picked up the phone and read the words that would sever our ties forever. "Zora, I am done asking. You have until 12 p.m. tomorrow to transfer the full $35,000 to your mother. If the money is not in the account by noon, do not bother showing up to the wedding. You will be removed from the guest list. You will be removed from the family. Do not test me on this. We will cut you off completely." I stared at the screen. For 32 years, a message like this would have sent me into a panic. I would have scrambled to apologize, to pay, to buy my way back into their good graces. But tonight all I saw was leverage. They were giving me an out. They were handing me a written contract that said if I did not pay, I was free. I did not type a paragraph defending myself. I did not beg. I typed exactly 2 words: deal. I hit send. Then I blocked the number. I opened my laptop and went to the travel website I had been browsing for weeks. I found the resort in the Maldives, the one with the overwater bungalows, private butlers, and 0 cell service. I selected the most expensive package they offered. First-class flight leaving tomorrow morning, all-inclusive, spa treatments, private yacht transfer. The total came to $34,950. I smiled. It was almost poetic. I entered my credit card information, the same card I planned to report stolen the moment my plane took off. I hit confirm booking. The screen flashed a bright, cheerful confirmation. "You are going to paradise," it said. I looked around my apartment. The mess on the floor no longer bothered me. I would hire a cleaning crew to deal with it while I was gone. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out my largest suitcase. I packed my bikinis, my silk caftans, and my noise-canceling headphones. I did not pack a bridesmaid dress. As I zipped up the suitcase, I felt a lightness in my chest I had not felt in years. They wanted to cut me off. They wanted to threaten me with exclusion. They had no idea that they had just threatened a prisoner with an open door. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. By the time the deadline hit tomorrow noon, I would be 30,000 feet in the air, and their world would be crumbling on the ground. The digital confirmation of my flight to the Maldives glowed on my screen, a beacon of my impending freedom, but I knew that leaving was only half the battle. If I wanted to truly sever the toxic limb that was my family, I had to ensure they could not graft themselves back onto my life while I was gone. It was 3 in the morning, and the penthouse was silent, save for the rhythmic snoring of my father echoing from the guest wing. I moved through the shadows of my own home like a ghost, executing a tactical extraction of my own assets. I did not need a moving truck. I needed a secure briefcase. I went to the wall safe hidden behind a generic abstract painting in my study. My fingers danced over the keypad, punching in the combination. The heavy steel door swung open with a faint hiss. I bypassed the stacks of cash. I was not worried about cash. I reached for the documents that proved ownership. The deed to the penthouse, the title to the vacation home on the vineyard, the original trust documents, and most importantly, my grandfather's vintage watch. It was the only heirloom in this family that had not been pawned or sold by my father. He had been eyeing it for years, making jokes about how it would look better on a man's wrist. I slipped the cold metal into my velvet pouch. He would never touch it again. I moved to the living room where my mother had left her purse carelessly on the coffee table. I did not touch her things. I was not a thief. Instead, I picked up the spare key fob to the penthouse that I had lent her for the week. I slipped it into my pocket. Then I took out my phone and opened the smart home security app. I could have just deleted their access codes instantly, but that would have caused a scene before I could leave. I needed them to feel secure until the trap snapped shut. I navigated to the user settings for Guest 1 and Guest 2. I set an expiration timer on their digital keys. In exactly 48 hours, right around the time they would be returning from the disastrous wedding reception, every code they knew would be invalid. The smart locks would disengage from their fingerprints. The alarm system would reset to a new frequency. I did not stop there. I called a 24-hour emergency locksmith service, a high-end firm that dealt with corporate security. I met the technician down in the lobby at 4:15 in the morning while my family slept upstairs. I handed him a work order. I want the physical tumblers changed on the service entrance in the master suite. I told him quietly, slipping him $100 bill for his discretion. Do not start the work until 9 a.m. tomorrow. By then I will be gone, and they will be too busy getting their hair and makeup done to notice you. When they come back, I want this place to be a fortress. He nodded, understanding the gravity in my eyes. By 6 in the morning, I was showered, dressed in a white linen suit, and standing in the elevator of my building. My luggage was already in the trunk of the waiting town car. I had one stop to make before the airport. I directed the driver to the glass and steel tower downtown, where my personal attorney, Mr. Henderson, had his office. He was an early riser, a shark in a suit who had been warning me about my family's financial abuse for years. When I walked into his conference room, he did not look surprised. He simply pushed a stack of papers across the mahogany table. Is it time? He asked. It is time, I replied, picking up the heavy fountain pen. I signed the power of attorney documents granting him full authority to act on my behalf regarding the eviction proceedings and the asset freeze. I want you to be ruthless, I said, looking him in the eye. They are going to claim squatters' rights. They are going to claim familial obligation. I want you to bury them in so much paperwork that they will need a shovel to find their way out. Initiate the sale of the house they are currently living in. Send the eviction notice for the penthouse guest suite. And Mr. Henderson, if they try to contact me, I want every call routed directly to your office. Consider it done, Zora, he said, closing the file with a satisfying thump. Enjoy the beach. I walked out of the law firm and into the bright morning sunlight. The city was waking up. People were rushing to jobs they hated to support families they loved. I was rushing away from a family I loved to support, the only person who had ever truly supported me, myself. I climbed into the back of the black SUV. To the airport, I told the driver. As the car pulled away from the curb, I turned my head to look back at the skyline one last time. Somewhere in one of those tall buildings, my mother was probably just waking up expecting the smell of coffee and a $35,000 transfer notification. She was waking up to a daughter who was still there in her mind. She had no idea that the Zora she knew was already gone, leaving nothing behind but a ghost and a very expensive lesson. I did not feel sad. I did not feel guilty. I adjusted my sunglasses, leaned back against the leather seat, and watched the city disappear in the rearview mirror. The bridge was burned. Now it was time to watch the fire from a safe distance. The cabin of the Emirates. A 380 was quiet, a hushed sanctuary of gold trim and polished wood floating 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. I sat in my private suite, wrapped in a blanket that cost more than my first car, watching the clouds drift by outside the window. A flight attendant with a perfect smile placed a flute of Dom Perignon and a dish of warm nuts on my side table. "Is there anything else I can get you, Miss Freeman?" she asked softly. I shook my head and thanked her. She slid the privacy door shut, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my laptop. I took a sip of the champagne. It was crisp and cold, but it could not wash away the bitter taste of memory that rose in the back of my throat. Being up here in the sky, detached from the earth, gave me a vantage point I had avoided for too long. I closed my eyes and saw myself at 16 years old. It was the day of my high school graduation. I was valedictorian. I had practiced my speech for weeks, hoping to finally see a glimmer of pride in my father's eyes. But when I looked out into the audience, their seats were empty. They had arrived 40 minutes late because Keisha had a hair crisis and needed to be driven to the salon. They missed my speech. They missed my name being called. When they finally showed up, my mother handed me a card with $50 in it and told me to stop sulking because at least they made it for the pictures. That was the story of my life. I was the responsible one. The one who did not need attention, the one who could handle it. I was the scapegoat who absorbed the family's dysfunction so Keisha could remain the golden child, pristine and unburdened. They trained me to be their safety net. They groomed me to be the mule that carried their heavy loads while they rode in the carriage. Even my success as a venture capitalist was not celebrated as my achievement, but as a stroke of luck for the family. My wealth was never mine. It was ours. I opened my eyes and looked at the digital clock on my laptop screen. It read 11:59 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The deadline. My father's threat had been clear. Transfer the money by noon or be cut off. I picked up my phone one last time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I checked my messages. There was nothing. No apology. No text saying they loved me regardless of the money. No call to say, "Let us talk this out." Just silence. They were so arrogant, so assured of their control over me, that they did not even feel the need to check in. They assumed the money would simply appear in the account as it always did, magic money from the magic daughter. The clock flickered. 12 p.m. I waited one more minute just to be sure. I watched the second hand sweep around the digital face. 12:01 p.m. The deal was broken. I set the champagne glass down and pulled my laptop closer. The screen was already logged into the private wealth management portal. The interface was sleek and dark, displaying the total assets of the Freeman Family Trust. It was a substantial number, a number I had built with sleepless nights and high-risk trades. I navigated to the credit card management tab. I saw the list of authorized users. Elaine Freeman, Robert Freeman, Keisha Freeman. Beside each name was a green indicator light that said active. Beside each name was a spending limit I had generously set to $50,000 a month. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. It was a necessary procedure to save the patient. I moved my cursor to the master control button at the top of the list. Select all. Then I moved to the status drop-down menu. There were a few options: suspend, deactivate, report loss stolen. Suspend was too temporary. Deactivate was too gentle. I selected Report Loss Stolen. This option would not just decline their transactions, it would trigger an immediate fraud alert. It would flag any attempt to use the physical cards as criminal activity. It would require the primary account holder, me, to physically walk into a branch with identification to reactivate them. And I was going to be in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I took a deep breath. My finger hovered over the trackpad. For the 16-year-old girl who waited for parents who never came. For the college student who ate ramen while her sister drove a BMW. For the woman who was told she was nothing without them. I clicked confirm. The screen loaded for a split second, a spinning wheel of doom for them, a wheel of fortune for me. Then a green banner appeared at the top of the screen. Success. All cards reported stolen. Accounts frozen pending investigation. I stared at the words. It was done. The financial umbilical cord was severed. At this exact moment down in Atlanta, a florist was probably trying to swipe my father's card. A caterer was likely asking for the final payment, and in a few seconds, their world would stop spinning. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. I picked up my champagne glass and downed the rest of it in one gulp. I felt a vibration in the floor as the plane banked slightly, turning east toward the sunrise. I reclined my seat, fully adjusting the fluffy pillow behind my head. For the first time in my life, I did not owe anyone anything. I was just Zora, and I was going on vacation. While I was sipping vintage champagne at 30,000 feet, chaos was erupting on the ground in Atlanta. The morning of the wedding was supposed to be a coronation for my sister Keisha, a day where she would finally ascend to the throne of perfection she believed she deserved. Instead, the kingdom was crumbling before the first bobby pin was even secured. The atmosphere inside the bridal suite at the high-end salon was thick with hairspray and entitlement. Keisha sat in the swivel chair admiring her reflection, while a team of 3 stylists worked on her hair and makeup. My mother Elaine stood nearby, critiquing the shade of lipstick and barking orders at the assistants like a general at war. "Okay, ladies, that is a wrap on the bridal party," announced Sasha, the head makeup artist, who charged $200 an hour and did not tolerate nonsense. "The total comes to $2,500, including the travel fee. You can settle up at the front desk before we head to the venue for touch-ups." My mother waved her hand dismissively, marching to the register with her chin held high. She pulled out the platinum credit card that bore her name, but was linked directly to my trust account. She slapped it onto the counter with the confidence of a woman who had never paid a bill with her own money in 5 years. "Put it all on this," she commanded. "And add a 20% tip. We are generous people." The receptionist swiped the card. A sharp, dissonant beep cut through the chatter of the salon. My mother frowned. "Try it again. The chip is probably dusty." The receptionist sighed and inserted the chip again. Beep. Declined. My mother's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice rising an octave. "There is no limit on this card. It is a platinum account. Your machine must be broken. Do you know who we are? My daughter is about to marry a miller. Fix your equipment. I will try entering the numbers manually." The receptionist said, her patience thinning. She typed in the 16 digits. Suddenly, the screen flashed red. The receptionist looked up, her expression changing from annoyed to suspicious. "Ma'am, the system says this card has been reported stolen. I am required to confiscate it." "Stolen?" my mother shrieked, snatching the card back before the girl could reach for it. "Do not be absurd. It is my card." From the chair, Keisha turned around, her half-finished updo wobbling. "Mom, what is going on? We need to leave in 20 minutes. Just pay the woman." "I cannot pay her because this stupid machine is rejecting me," my mother yelled. Sasha, the makeup artist, stopped packing her kit. She crossed her arms over her chest. "No payment, no service. And we definitely are not coming to the venue for touch-ups if the deposit bounces. In fact, if you do not settle this bill in 5 minutes, I am calling the police for theft of services." Keisha let out a wail that sounded like a dying cat. "Mom, fix this. Do not let her leave. My contour is not blended yet. My mother was frantically digging through her purse for another card when her phone began to ring. It was my father. She answered it on speaker, desperate for a lifeline. Robert, thank God. This salon is incompetent. You need to come down here and bring cash. Elaine, shut up and listen to me. My father's voice roared through the speaker, panicked and breathless. I am at the venue. The florist is here with the van. He just tried to run my card for the final $8,000. It declined. He says if he does not get paid in 10 minutes, he is taking the flowers back to the shop. What do you mean? Declined. My mother whispered, the blood draining from her face. I mean declined, Elaine. Invalid. Reported lost or stolen. Every single card in my wallet is dead. I tried the debit card. I tried the emergency visa. Nothing works. The florist is already loading the hydrangeas back into the truck. The salon went deadly silent. The stylists exchanged looks. Sasha reached for her phone, presumably to warn other vendors in the industry. It is... Zora Keisha screamed, her eyes wide with horror. That jealous witch. She controls the accounts. She did this. She locked us out. My mother's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone. She ended the call with my father and immediately dialed my number. She stabbed at the screen with her manicured nail, her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Pick up, she hissed. Pick up the phone, you ungrateful little brat. When I get my hands on you, I will make you wish you were never born. You cannot do this to us. Not today. She held the phone to her ear, waiting for the ring, waiting to unleash hell. But there was no ring. There was no voicemail greeting. There was only the cold, mechanical voice of an automated operator, a sound that signaled the beginning of the end for the Freeman family wedding. The number you have dialed is currently not in service or is located outside of the coverage area. Please check the number and try your call again. My mother lowered the phone slowly. She looked at Keisha, whose mascara was starting to run down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, Elaine Freeman looked small. She is gone, my mother whispered. She really did it. We have no money. Sasha cleared her throat loudly. Time is up, ladies. Cash or cops. Choose now. While my mother was fighting a losing battle against a credit card terminal at the hair salon, Julian was pulling up to the Starlight Estate in a rented white Bentley. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his silk tie, looking every bit the part of the wealthy groom he pretended to be. He had spent the morning posting Instagram stories about his big day, tagging luxury brands he did not actually own, and captioning photos with phrases like, "blessed" and "empire building." He walked toward the massive double oak doors of the ballroom, expecting them to swing open for his grand entrance. Instead, he found them firmly shut. Standing in front of them was Mr. Banks, the venue manager, a man who had seen enough weddings to know exactly when a check was going to bounce. Julian flashed his signature charming smile. Good morning, Mr. Banks. I am here to do a final walkthrough before the guests arrive. We need to make sure the lighting is perfect for the videographer. Mr. Banks did not smile back. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. Good morning, Julian. We would love to let you in, but there is the small matter of the final payment. As per our contract, the remaining 50% of the venue fee was due upon arrival. That is $50,000. Julian laughed, a nervous sound that cracked slightly at the edges. Oh, right. The payment. My father-in-law Robert should have handled that. He is the one with the checkbook. Mr. Banks checked his clipboard. Actually, the contract states that the balance must be paid in full before the doors open. We tried to run the card on file this morning, the one belonging to Ms. Zora Freeman, but the transaction was declined. We called Mr. Freeman, but he did not answer. So until we receive payment, the doors stay locked. The smile fell from Julian's face. He pulled out his phone and dialed my father. Come on, Robert, pick up, he muttered. Just then, my father's sedan screeched into the parking lot. He parked crookedly and ran toward the entrance, his face pale and sweating profusely. He had just come from the florist disaster and looked like a man on the verge of a heart attack. Julian marched down the steps to meet him. Robert, what is going on? The manager says the doors are locked because Zora's card declined. Fix this. I have followers expecting live updates. My father wiped sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. It is a nightmare, Julian. Zora cut us off. She froze everything. The florist left. Your mother-in-law is stuck at the salon. You need to handle the venue. Use your card. Julian took a step back, looking at my father as if he had spoken in a foreign language. My card? What are you talking about? You said Zora was covering the venue. That was the deal. My father threw his hands up in the air. The deal is dead. Zora is gone. We have to improvise. Just put it on your American Express for now. I will pay you back once I liquidate some stocks next week. Just get the doors open. Julian's eyes darted around the parking lot. He tugged at his collar. I cannot do that, Robert. My funds are tied up. I have everything in offshore crypto accounts right now. It takes days to liquidate. You know how it is with high-level investing? My father stopped panting. He stared at Julian. The panic in his eyes was replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. Crypto accounts. Julian, this is $50,000. You drive a Bentley. You wear Italian suits. Are you telling me you do not have access to $50,000? Julian became defensive, his voice rising. Do not look at me like that. I am an entrepreneur. My money is working for me. I do not just keep cash sitting around like a peasant. I thought you people had money. I thought Zora was the safety net. You told me this family was loaded. My father stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We are loaded. Zora is loaded. But right now I need you to step up. If you cannot pay this, there is no wedding. Julian scoffed, crossing his arms. Well, I am not paying it. This is your daughter's wedding. It is the bride's family's responsibility. If you are broke, just admit it. You little fraud, my father shouted, losing his composure completely. You have been mooching off our dinners and vacations for 2 years. You do not have a dime, do you? You were counting on Zora to pay for your lifestyle just like we were. The shouting match escalated quickly. Julian screamed that he was a brand and could not be associated with poverty. My father screamed that Julian was a parasite. They were so busy destroying each other that they did not notice the line of cars pulling into the long driveway. The first limousine arrived, carrying my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Ben, the gossip centers of the family. They rolled down the window expecting to be greeted with champagne and music. Instead, they saw the groom and the father of the bride standing in the gravel, red-faced and screaming, while the venue manager stood behind them with his arms crossed, guarding the locked doors. Behind the limo, more cars began to pile up. Cousins, business partners, friends from the club. They all watched through their windshields as the perfect image of the Freeman family shattered in the midday sun. The doors remained locked. The venue remained silent. And the humiliation was only just beginning. While the Starlight Estate was devolving into a scene from a reality television nightmare, I was lying face down on a plush towel, listening to the sound of gentle waves lapping against the stilts of my overwater bungalow. The spa at the resort was an architectural masterpiece of glass and teak wood suspended over the turquoise lagoon. The air smelled of lemongrass and ginger. My masseuse was a woman with magic hands who seemed determined to knead every ounce of stress my family had deposited into my shoulders over the last decade. For the first time in years, my mind was not racing with spreadsheets or family obligations. It was completely and utterly blank. I had placed my phone on the small teak table directly beneath the face cradle. I told myself it was for safety in case of an emergency back home, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted to see it happen. I wanted a front row seat to the destruction I had orchestrated. When the screen finally lit up, it was not a text message. It was a video call request from Keisha. I signaled for the masseuse to pause for a moment. She stepped back silently, blending into the shadows of the room. I flipped onto my back, wrapping the fluffy white robe around my chest, and picked up the phone. I took a deep breath, adjusted my hair, which was loose and wavy from the humidity, and pressed the green answer button. The face that filled my screen was unrecognizable. Keisha, who had spent hours in the makeup chair that morning, looked like she had been caught in a monsoon. Her expensive contour was streaked with tears. Her mascara had created raccoon circles around her eyes. Her hair, which was supposed to be in an elegant updo, was frizzing out of control. Behind her, I could see the blurry outline of the venue parking lot, and I could hear shouting. It sounded like Julian screaming at my father. "Zora, where are you?" Keisha shrieked, her voice distorting through the tiny speakers. The video shook as she paced back and forth. "You have to come here right now. Everything is ruining. Dad's cards are not working. Mom is stuck at the salon. Julian is fighting with the venue manager. You need to fix this. Transfer the money, Zora. Stop this sick joke and transfer the money." I looked at her calmly. I looked at the chaos in her eyes, the sheer panic of a spoiled child who has finally been told no. Then I looked at my own reflection in the corner of the screen. My skin was glowing from the facial I had just received. The ocean behind me was a brilliant, sparkling blue. "Hello, Keisha," I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. "You look stressed. You should really try deep breathing. It does wonders for the complexion." "Stressed?" Keisha screamed. "I am not stressed. I am dying. My wedding is falling apart. Where are you?" That background. Is that a green screen? You are at your apartment, aren't you? Stop hiding and get down here with your checkbook. I let out a soft laugh. "I am not at my apartment, Keisha. I am at the Waldorf Astoria in the Maldives." Keisha stopped pacing. She brought the phone closer to her face, squinting as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "The Maldives. What are you doing in the Maldives? Today is my wedding." I shifted slightly on the massage table, letting the robe slip just enough to show the tropical flower tucked behind my ear. "You gave me a choice, remember? You and Dad sent that text. You said, pay $35,000 or do not come to the wedding." Keisha froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I thought about it," I continued. "And I decided you were right. $35,000 is a lot of money to spend on one day. So I took your advice. I decided not to come to the wedding. Instead, I spent that exact amount on this trip. The flight was $12,000, the villa was $15,000, and this spa treatment alone is $600. It is worth every penny." The realization hit her like a physical blow. I watched her face crumble. "You spent my wedding money on a vacation," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You stole my wedding." "I did not steal anything," I said sharply. "It was never your money, Keisha. It was my money. It has always been my money, and now I am spending it on the only person who actually appreciates it. Me." "But what about us?" she wailed. "What about Mom and Dad? They are going to be arrested. The venue manager is calling the cops." "That sounds like a personal problem," I said, reaching for my glass of cucumber water. "Maybe Julian can pay for it with his crypto accounts. Or maybe you can ask Dad to use his gambling winnings." "Oh wait, that is right. There are none. Zora, please," she sobbed, the fight draining out of her. "Please do not do this. I am your sister." I looked at her crying on the screen, and I waited for a pang of guilt. I waited to feel that familiar tug of obligation. But it never came. All I felt was relief. "Happy wedding day, Keisha," I said. Send me pictures if you guys ever make it inside." I did not wait for her response. I pressed the red button ending the call. Then I went to her contact settings. I scrolled down to the bottom and tapped block caller. I did the same for my mother, and my father, and Julian. I placed the phone back on the table face down. I lay back down on the plush towel and closed my eyes. "I am ready to continue now," I told the masseuse. As her strong hands began to work on my shoulders again, I listened to the sound of the ocean. It was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The silence of my phone was not empty. It was full. It was full of peace. It was full of freedom. And it was bought and paid for in full. The silence that followed my disconnection of the call in the Maldives was mirrored by a very different kind of silence in Atlanta, one that was heavy with impending doom. In the parking lot of the Starlight Estate, the humid Georgia air hung thick over the crowd of confused guests. Mr. Banks. The venue manager checked his watch with the precision of an executioner. The grace period was over. He signaled to the uniformed security guards who had been waiting discreetly in the wings. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Banks announced, his voice projecting clearly over the murmuring crowd. "I regret to inform you that the event scheduled for today has been canceled due to non-fulfillment of contractual financial obligations. We ask that you please vacate the premises immediately. The gates will be closing in 15 minutes. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. My Aunt Sarah clutched her pearls. Cousins whispered frantically to one another. The illusion of the wealthy, perfect Freeman family evaporated in an instant, leaving behind only the naked truth of unpaid bills and broken promises. Julian's mother, Linda Whiteman, looked as though she had just swallowed a lemon. She turned slowly to face my mother, Elaine, who was still clutching her phone, staring at the screen where I had just blocked her. Linda's eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now blazing with fury. She had tolerated my family because she thought we were her son's ticket to the good life. Now she realized she had boarded a sinking ship. "You lied to us," Linda spat, her voice slicing through the humid air. "You stood there at the engagement party and bragged about your assets. You talked about generational wealth. And you cannot even pay to open the doors to the reception. You are nothing but frauds." My mother cornered, and desperate lashed out with the only defense she had left. "It is not us," she shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "It is Zora. That spiteful girl froze the accounts. She has all the money. She manages the trust. She took everything and ran off to some island." The admission hung in the air like toxic smoke. My mother had intended to blame me to make me the villain, but in doing so, she had inadvertently admitted the one thing she had tried so hard to hide. They had no money of their own. Linda let out a harsh, cruel laugh. "So it is true, then. You are broke. You have been living off your daughter this whole time. You are not investors. You are leeches. And you tried to trick my Julian into marrying into your debt." Julian, who had been pacing near the white Bentley, stopped in his tracks. He listened to his mother's words and looked at the closed doors of the venue. He looked at the security guards ushering guests back to their cars. He calculated the odds. If he married Keisha today, he would not be getting a trust fund. He would be getting a wife with expensive taste, a mountain of credit card debt, and in-laws who were essentially destitute, without their eldest daughter's charity. He walked over to Keisha, who was standing by the limo, trembling in her $12,000 dress. She reached out for him, her eyes pleading. "Julian, baby, please do something. Tell them who you are. Fix this." Julian did not take her hand. He stepped back, putting physical distance between them, as if her poverty was contagious. "I cannot do this, Keisha," he said, his voice loud enough for the remaining guests to hear. "I am building a brand. I am building an empire. I cannot be associated with a family that gets evicted from their own wedding. It is embarrassing. It is low class." Keisha's knees began to shake. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I am saying the wedding is off," Julian declared, adjusting his silk cuffs. "I am not marrying a liar. Do not contact me." He turned on his heel and walked toward his mother. "Let us go, Mom. We are leaving." Keisha watched him get into the Bentley. She watched the love of her life, the man she had alienated her sister for, drive away without looking back. The weight of the humiliation, the heat of the sun, and the crushing reality of her situation hit her all at once. Her eyes rolled back in her head, her legs gave out. "Keisha!" My father screamed, rushing forward just as she collapsed onto the hot asphalt. She fell in a heap of silk and lace, fainting dead away in the middle of the parking lot. My parents fell to their knees beside her, screaming for help, while the last of the guests drove around them, eager to escape the disaster. The wedding was over. The family was broken. And I was thousands of miles away, ordering another glass of champagne. The ride back from the venue was a funeral procession for a marriage that never happened. Keisha sat in the back seat of my father's sedan, sobbing into the tulle of her $12,000 gown. Her makeup was ruined, her dreams were shattered, and her fiancé had driven off into the sunset, leaving her with nothing but humiliation. My parents sat in the front seat, staring straight ahead in a state of shell-shocked silence. They did not speak to each other. They did not try to comfort Keisha. The reality of their financial exposure was settling in like a heavy fog. They had been outed as frauds in front of their friends, their enemies, and the wealthy family they had tried so desperately to impress. When the car finally pulled into the driveway of the estate, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. My father killed the engine, and for a moment they just sat there listening to the ticking of the cooling motor. The house looked different. Usually at this hour the landscape lighting would be illuminating the manicured hedges, and the porch lights would be casting a warm, welcoming glow. Tonight the house was a dark, looming monolith against the purple sky. "We need to get inside and figure out a plan," my father muttered, opening his door. "We need to call a lawyer and see if we can sue Julian for breach of promise. And we need to get Zora on the phone. I do not care if she is in the Maldives. I will fly there myself and drag her back if I have to." He marched up the stone steps to the massive front door, his footsteps heavy with anger. He punched the 4-digit entry code into the smart lock. He waited for the familiar mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding back. Nothing happened. The keypad did not light up. The lock did not turn. He punched the code again, harder this time. Still nothing. The lock remained cold and unresponsive. "Damn it," he cursed, kicking the bottom of the door. "The battery must be dead. Elaine, give me your phone. Use the app to unlock it." My mother fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking. She pulled out her phone and opened the smart home application. She tapped the icon for the front door. A red error message flashed across her screen. "Access denied. User privileges revoked." "What do you mean revoked?" my father shouted, snatching the phone from her hand. He stared at the screen. Under the status for guest user Robert and guest user Elaine, the text read, "Expired." "She locked us out," my mother whispered, clutching her chest. "She actually locked us out of the house." Panic began to set in. It was 80 degrees in Atlanta, and the humidity was stifling. They were tired, hungry, and humiliated. My father ran around to the back of the house, trying the patio doors. Locked. He tried the kitchen window. Locked. Every entry point was sealed tight. "I am not sleeping in the car," my father yelled, picking up a heavy decorative garden stone. "This is my house. I have lived here for 2 years. She cannot do this to me." "Robert, no!" my mother screamed, but it was too late. My father hurled the stone through the glass pane of the side door. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. He reached his hand through the jagged hole, unlocked the deadbolt, and shoved the door open. "Get inside," he ordered. "We will deal with the window later." They stumbled into the kitchen, expecting the cool relief of air conditioning. Instead, they were hit with a wall of stagnant hot air. The house was silent. The refrigerator was not humming. The microwave display was dark. I had canceled the electricity and water services that morning, effective immediately. My mother flipped a light switch. Nothing. "Robert, it is pitch black," she cried. "Use your flashlight," he snapped. They moved into the living room, the beams of their phone flashlights cutting through the darkness. And that is when the true horror of their situation revealed itself. The light swept across the room and revealed nothing. The room was empty. The grand piano was gone. The Persian rugs were gone. The leather sofas, the crystal vases, the oil paintings I had collected over a decade, all of it was gone. I had hired a premium moving service to clear out my personal property the second I left for the airport. The house was stripped to the studs. The only things remaining were a few cheap plastic chairs in the kitchen and their personal suitcases, which had been piled carelessly in the center of the floor. "She took everything," Keisha wailed, her voice echoing off the bare walls. "Even the TV is gone." My mother sank onto her suitcase, burying her face in her hands. "We are destitute," she sobbed. "We have no lights. We have no water. We have no furniture." But they did not have time to process the extent of their loss. While my father was busy breaking the window, he had triggered the silent alarm system. Since the power was cut, the system was running on an emergency backup battery that I controlled directly. It did not sound a siren inside the house. Instead, it sent a high-priority distress signal to the local police precinct, reporting a break-in in progress at the residence of Zora Freeman. The first sign was the flashing blue lights sweeping across the living room walls, illuminating the empty space in strobe-like bursts. Then came the screech of tires on the gravel. My father ran to the window. "Oh God!" he gasped. 3 police cruisers had blocked the driveway. Officers were already spilling out, weapons drawn, taking cover behind their doors. A voice boomed from a megaphone. "Come out with your hands up! We have the perimeter surrounded. My family." The people who had started the day believing they were untouchable royalty now found themselves standing in the dark, sweating in their expensive clothes, trapped in an empty house they did not own, with the law waiting for them outside. The trap I had set had snapped shut, and there was no one left to bail them out. The holding cell at the precinct was a far cry from the luxury suites my family was accustomed to. Instead of Egyptian cotton sheets and room service, they were surrounded by cinder block walls, painted a depressing shade of beige, and the lingering scent of bleach and misery. My father, Robert, sat on a metal bench, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned and stained with sweat. My mother, Elaine, paced back and forth in her heels, the clicking sound echoing off the concrete floor like a nervous tick. And Keisha, curled in the corner, still wearing her ruined wedding dress, looked like a fallen angel who had crash-landed in hell. The officer in charge, a stern woman named Sergeant Miller, had little patience for their hysterics. When they were brought in, my father had tried to pull the "Do you know who I am?" card. It did not work. In the eyes of the law, they were simply 3 individuals caught breaking and entering into a private residence. The fact that they shared a last name with the homeowner was irrelevant. The deed was in my name. The alarm was registered to me, and since I was unreachable to verify their story, they were processed just like any other criminals. "We need to call Zora," my mother hissed for the 10th time. She stopped pacing and gripped the bars of the cell. "She has to answer eventually. Tell them to let us use the phone again." "We tried, Elaine." My father snapped his head in his hands. "It goes straight to voicemail. She blocked us. She actually blocked us. I cannot believe she would leave her own flesh and blood in a cage." Keisha lifted her head. Her makeup was a smeared tragedy. "Call Julian," she whispered. "Call him. He will help. He has connections. He can post bail." My father looked at her with pity. "Keisha, honey, Julian is gone. You saw him at the parking lot. He drove away. He was just angry," Keisha insisted, her voice rising with desperation. "He loves me. He would not leave me here. Please, Dad, use your one call to reach him. Tell him I am sorry. Tell him it was a misunderstanding." Reluctantly, my father signaled the guard. He was granted one final phone call. With shaking hands, he dialed the number for Julian Miller. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then it went to voicemail. My father hung up and dialed again. This time it did not even ring. It went straight to an automated message. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time." He looked back at Keisha and shook his head slowly. "He blocked me too, Keisha. He is not coming." Keisha let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She buried her face in her knees, rocking back and forth. The reality of her life was crashing down on her. No husband, no money, no home, and now no savior. The golden child was finally learning that gold plating chips off very easily when things get rough. They spent the night huddled together on the cold bench. My mother wept silently, mourning the loss of her social standing. My father stared at the wall, contemplating the ruin of his finances. They were tired, hungry, and stripped of their dignity. For years they had lived in a fortress of arrogance built on my money. Now that the fortress had crumbled, they were just three scared people in a jail cell. The sun rose slowly, filtering through the high barred windows. Around 8 in the morning, the heavy metal door to the holding area buzzed open. My family scrambled to their feet, hope flashing in their eyes. They expected to see me. They expected Zora the fixer to walk in with a checkbook and an apology ready to make the nightmare go away. Instead, a man in a sharp charcoal suit walked in carrying a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Henderson, my attorney. My mother rushed to the bars. "Oh, thank God. Mr. Henderson, Zora sent you, didn't she? Is she here? Get us out of here. This is a terrible mistake." Mr. Henderson did not smile. He did not offer a comforting hand. He stood on the other side of the bars, maintaining a professional distance. "Good morning, Mrs. Freeman," he said, his voice cool and detached. "Ms. Freeman is not here. She is currently unavailable and has instructed that all communication go through me." "Well, pay the bail," my father demanded. "Get us out and we can discuss this later." Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. "I am afraid there is a misunderstanding. I am not here to post bail. I am here to serve you with legal notice." He opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 thick envelopes. He slid them through the gap in the bars. "What is this?" Keisha asked, picking up the packet with trembling hands. "That is a formal eviction notice for the property on Oak Street," Mr. Henderson explained. "You have 7 days to vacate the premises and remove your personal effects. Additionally, you will find a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of Zora Freeman or any of her properties. And finally, there is a civil lawsuit regarding the misappropriation of funds from the Freeman Family Trust. We are suing for the return of $150,000 plus legal fees." My father looked as if he had been punched in the gut. "You are suing us," he whispered. "Zora is suing her own parents." "Zora is reclaiming her assets," Mr. Henderson corrected. "I suggest you use your one phone call to find a criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one for the breaking and entering charges. Good day." He turned and walked away, the sound of his dress shoes clicking on the floor. My family stood in the cell holding the papers that sealed their fate. They were not being rescued. They were being held accountable. And for the first time in their lives, there was no one left to blame but themselves. The silence in the holding cell was broken only by the rustle of stiff, legal paper as Mr. Henderson began to distribute the documents with the precision of a blackjack dealer. My father, Robert, was the first to receive his packet. He took the heavy envelope, his hands shaking so violently that the papers inside rattled against one another. He pulled out the top sheet, and his eyes widened as they scanned the bold text at the header. It was not a bail bond. It was a civil complaint filed in the Superior Court. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and spoke with a calm, detached authority that made the words land harder. "Mr. Freeman, that document outlines the first of several legal actions my client Zora Freeman is bringing against you. Specifically, it cites breach of fiduciary duty and embezzlement. Over the course of 5 years, you have systematically siphoned approximately $150,000 from the family trust. Money that was designated for retirement and emergency medical care was instead traced to offshore gambling sites and high-stakes poker games." My father looked up, his face draining of color. "She cannot do this," he stammered. "I am her father. That money belongs to the family." Mr. Henderson did not blink. "The trust is a legal entity, Mr. Freeman. You were granted access as a beneficiary for specific needs. Gambling is not a specific need. It is theft. And since the amount exceeds $100,000, we are also forwarding the evidence to the district attorney for potential criminal charges." Beside him, my mother Elaine let out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. But Mr. Henderson was not finished. He turned his attention to Keisha, who was still huddled on the bench looking like a tragic ruin in her torn wedding dress. "Ms. Freeman," he said, extending a second envelope toward her. This concerns you. Keisha recoiled, refusing to take the papers. I do not want it, she whispered. I did not do anything. I just wanted a wedding. Mr. Henderson placed the envelope on the bench beside her. Inside, you will find a detailed summary of credit card transactions made over the last 6 months, totaling just over $50,000. These purchases, including designer handbags, shoes, and a deposit on a luxury vehicle, were not authorized by the primary account holder. Since you signed the receipts knowing you had no means to repay the debt, this constitutes credit card fraud. Zora is suing for the immediate repayment of the full amount plus interest. Keisha looked at him with wet red eyes. But I am authorized, she cried. It is the family card. You were an authorized user, Mr. Henderson corrected. But the terms of use were clear. Personal enrichment at the expense of the trust is prohibited. You spent $50,000 you did not have on items you did not need while your sister paid your rent. That ends today. Finally, he reached into his briefcase for the third document. This one he held up for all of them to see. It was a single sheet of paper with a bright red stamp on it, and this he announced is an eviction notice. As of this morning, the property on Oak Street is being listed for sale to liquidate assets and recover the stolen funds. You have exactly 7 days to remove your personal belongings. After that, the locks will be changed permanently and any remaining items will be auctioned off. The weight of the words hit my mother like a physical blow. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and her knees buckled. For the second time in 24 hours, Elaine Freeman collapsed, hitting the concrete floor of the cell with a sickening thud. Elaine, my father screamed, dropping the papers and rushing to her side. Help us! Someone help! The guard stepped forward, unlocking the cell to check on her, but Mr. Henderson remained impassive. He checked his watch as if he had a lunch reservation to get to. While the guard called for a medic, Keisha pulled herself up, using the bars for support. Her face was twisted with a mix of grief and denial. This is all Julian's fault, she sobbed. If he was here, he would fix this. He has money. He loves me. He is just scared. You do not understand him. Mr. Henderson paused, his hand hovering over the clasp of his briefcase. He looked at Keisha with something that almost resembled pity, but was mostly just professional fatigue. Ms. Freeman, he said slowly, before you waste any more emotional energy on Mr. Miller, there is one final piece of evidence my client asked me to share with you. She found this on the family cloud server. It seems Mr. Miller was not as careful with his digital footprint as he claimed. He pulled out a small digital voice recorder and pressed the play button. The tinny sound of the recording filled the small cell, cutting through my mother's moans and my father's pleas. It was Julian's voice, loud and clear, laughing. You have got to be kidding me, bro. I am telling you, these people are clueless. They act like they are royalty, but they are just hood rich. The sister Zora is the cash cow. Once I put a ring on Keisha, I get access to the trust. I am going to bleed them dry for a year, maybe 2, then dump the girl and move to Miami. She is so desperate for a husband she will sign anything I put in front of her. It is the easiest payday of my life. The recording clicked off. Keisha stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. The silence that followed was absolute. My father looked up from the floor, his face a mask of horror. My mother, who was just coming to, stirred and opened her eyes only to see the devastation on her daughter's face. Mr. Henderson dropped the recorder into his pocket. I suggest you focus on finding a public defender, he said, snapping his briefcase shut. Julian Miller is not coming to save you. He never was. With that, he turned and walked out of the precinct, leaving my family locked in a cage, with nothing but their debts, their lies, and the echoing laughter of the man who had played them all for fools. I drove to Julian's apartment with a singular focus that blurred the edges of my vision. The wedding dress I had torn off earlier was replaced by sweatpants, but the humiliation still clung to my skin like a second layer. I needed answers. I needed to understand how the man who promised me forever could stand by while I was dragged out of my own wedding venue. I still had the spare key he had given me 3 months ago, a symbol of a future that had disintegrated in the span of an afternoon. I didn't bother knocking. I shoved the key into the lock and pushed the door open, ready to scream, ready to demand an explanation, ready to beg if I had to. But the words died in my throat. The living room was dimly lit, but I saw them clearly. Julian was sitting on the beige sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking relaxed, almost bored. And he wasn't alone. Curled up next to him with her head resting comfortably on his shoulder was Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend. The woman he had sworn he blocked on every social media platform, the woman he called crazy and obsessive. They looked up as I stepped into the room and neither of them flinched. There was no scrambling to cover up, no guilt in their eyes, just a calm, cold annoyance. "You shouldn't be here, Keisha," Julian said, taking a slow sip of his drink. His voice was steady, devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with. It was the voice of a stranger. I stood there trembling, my eyes darting between him and Vanessa. "You are supposed to be my husband," I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a hollow ache. "We were supposed to be married today. Why is she here?" Julian set his glass down on the coffee table. The clink of the glass against the wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He stood up and walked toward me, but he didn't reach out. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. "Look around you, Keisha," he said, gesturing vaguely at the apartment. "Do you think I live in this dump because I like the aesthetic? Do you think I drive a leased car because I enjoy monthly payments?" I didn't understand what he was saying. I stared at him, confusion mixing with the heartbreak. "I am in debt, Keisha," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Gambling debt. Bad investments. I owe people who don't send letters from the bank. I owe people who break legs. I am in a hole so deep I can't see the sky anymore." My breath hitched. The expensive dinners, the gifts, the way he always insisted on handling the finances for the wedding. It all crashed down on me. The wedding, he continued, seeing the realization dawn on my face. The wedding was my payout. "Your father promised a substantial gift. The cash gifts from the guests. The refund on the venue deposit once I figured out a way to cancel it last minute and blame it on stress. I needed that money, Keisha. I needed it to stay alive." "You never loved me," I asked, my voice barely audible. I felt like I was floating outside of my body, watching a tragedy happen to someone else. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I liked you fine. You were easy. You were so desperate for someone to pick you, so desperate to show off a ring to your sister and your cousins, that you never asked the hard questions. You never looked at my bank statements. You never wondered why I rushed the engagement. You were a mark, Keisha. A willing, eager mark." Vanessa giggled from the couch. It was a soft, cruel sound that snapped something inside my brain. The grief evaporated instantly, replaced by a white-hot rage that blinded me. He had used me. He had humiliated me. He had turned my life into a spectacle just to pay off his bookie. I didn't make a conscious decision to move. My body just reacted. I lunged at him. I heard myself screaming, a primal sound of pure fury. My nails dug into his face, scratching, tearing. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to bleed the way I was bleeding on the inside. He shouted, stumbling back, tripping over the coffee table. We went down together in a tangle of limbs and shattered glass. Vanessa was screaming now, fumbling for her phone. "Get off him!" she shrieked. I didn't listen. I grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the floor and swung it. I didn't even know where it landed. I just swung again and again, fueled by months of lies and manipulation. Then the door burst open. I hadn't even heard the sirens. Strong hands grabbed my arms, hauling me off him. I was thrashing, kicking, still screaming at the man cowering on the floor with blood running down his face. "Stop resisting," a voice commanded. I felt the cold bite of metal against my wrists for the second time that day. The adrenaline drained out of me as they dragged me out of the apartment, leaving me limp and sobbing. I saw Julian sitting up, holding a towel to his head, looking at me with pure hatred. The ride to the station was a blur of neon lights and static from the police radio. I sat in the back of the cruiser, staring at the partition, feeling the utter ruin of my life. I had no husband. I had no dignity. I had assault charges. They put me in a holding cell. It was cold, smelling of stale coffee and bleach. I sat on the metal bench, my fancy manicure chipped, my hair a mess, my spirit broken. When the officer told me I had one phone call, I stared at the phone on the wall for a long time. There was only one person I could call. The person I had spent the last year trying to outshine. The person I had insulted and pushed away. The person who had tried to warn me in her own way. I dialed the number with shaking fingers. It rang once, twice. Hello. Zora's voice was calm, steady. Zora. I choked out, my voice cracking into a sob. It is Keisha. Please. I am at the station. He used me. He told me everything. I attacked him. I am in so much trouble. Please, Zora. I don't have anyone else. Please, help me. I walked into the conference room, and the air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous tune that seemed to freeze the tension in the air. It had been exactly 30 days since I boarded that plane, 30 days since I decided that the suffocating weight of their expectations would no longer be my burden to carry. I caught my reflection in the glass partition before pushing the heavy oak door open. My skin was now a deep, radiant bronze kissed by the tropical sun of the coast where I had spent the last month. I was wearing a crisp white linen suit that draped over my body with an effortless elegance. A stark contrast to the nervous, frantic energy waiting for me inside. I felt light. I felt powerful. I felt like a woman who had finally introduced herself to the person she was meant to be. When I entered, the silence was immediate and heavy. My parents and Keisha were already seated on the opposite side of the long mahogany table. The sight of them actually made me pause for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but out of sheer shock. They looked like ghosts of the people I had left behind. My mother, usually so obsessed with appearances that she wouldn't check the mail without lipstick, looked gray and gaunt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, revealing roots that hadn't been touched up in weeks, and there were deep, dark hollows under her eyes. My father sat slumped in his chair, his shoulders hunched forward as if the weight of the world was pressing down on his neck. His suit was wrinkled, likely the same one he had worn yesterday, and there was a subtle but distinct smell of stale motel air clinging to them. And then there was Keisha. My sister, the golden child, the one who was supposed to have the fairy tale. She sat in the corner staring blankly at the polished wood of the table. She looked small, diminished. The sparkle was gone from her eyes, replaced by a terrified emptiness. I knew she was out on bail because I was the one who authorized the transfer of funds to get her out, though I hadn't spoken to her since that desperate phone call from the jail cell. My attorney, Mr. Sterling, stood up and gestured for me to take the seat at the head of the table. I sat down, placing my clutch on the table with a deliberate calmness. I didn't say a word. I just looked at them, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Zora. My mother breathed out, her voice cracking. She reached a trembling hand across the table, but I didn't move to take it. You look wonderful. I didn't return the compliment. I simply nodded. We have been so worried about you, my father added, his voice hoarse. He tried to muster some of his old authority, but it fell flat. We didn't know where you were. You just vanished. I was finding myself. I said, my voice steady and clear, devoid of the hesitation that used to plague me in their presence. And it seems while I was gone, you all managed to lose everything. My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over onto her pale cheeks. It has been a nightmare, Zora. Absolute nightmare. Julian. That monster. He took everything. The wedding money. The second mortgage on the house. He even accessed the emergency accounts. We have lost the house, Zora. The bank gave us notice 3 days ago. We are staying at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It is filthy. It is unsafe. She looked at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes that used to look at me with disdain when I didn't measure up to her standards. "We are your family," she whispered. "We made mistakes. We know that now. We were blinded by him. But we are blood. You can't let us live on the street. We know you have the resources now. We know about the investments you made, the ones you hid from us." I looked at Mr. Sterling, who opened a folder and slid a single piece of paper toward them. It wasn't a check. It was a legal document outlining the separation of assets and a restraining order barring them from my properties. My father looked at the paper and then up at me, his face twisting in confusion and anger. "What is this? We are here to reconcile. We are here to heal. You are our daughter." I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "You speak of family, as if it is a magic word that erases history. You speak of blood, as if it is a binding contract for financial support. But I remember a different definition of family that you taught me." I looked directly at Keisha, who finally lifted her head to meet my gaze. Her lip trembled. "I remember the night I asked for help 2 years ago." I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "I remember when I needed a loan to save my business, the business you all called a hobby. And I remember the text message I received from you, Dad." My father paled, remembering. "You didn't even call," I said. "You sent a text. It said, 'We are investing in Keisha's future. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Don't ask us again.'" "That was different," my mother protested, wringing her hands. "We were trying to teach you independence, and I learned it." I replied, a small, humorless smile touching my lips. "I learned it so well that I no longer need you. I learned that the only person who will save me is me. You bet all your chips on Keisha and Julian. You sold my childhood home to fund their lifestyle. You mocked my work while praising a con artist, Zora." "Please," Keisha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry. I was stupid. I am so scared." I felt a twinge of pity for her, but it was distant, like watching a sad movie. "I will pay for your legal defense, Keisha, because I am not cruel. I will ensure you don't go to prison for defending yourself against a man who used you." But that is where it ends. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. My mother scrambled up, reaching for me again. "You can't leave us like this. We are a family. We love you." I paused at the door and looked back at them. The three of them huddled together in their misery, expecting me to revert to the scapegoat, who would set herself on fire to keep them warm. "You keep using that word," I said softly. "Family. But you are mistaken." I opened the door, letting the noise of the busy office filter in. "Family died the moment you sent that text message." I walked out, leaving them in the cold conference room, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. I stood on the other side of the heavy oak door for a moment, letting the silence settle in the hallway. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally severing the cords that had bound me to their toxicity for 3 decades. "But Mr. Sterling?" My attorney cleared his throat gently, reminding me that the final nails still needed to be hammered in. I wasn't just walking away, I was dictating the terms of their survival. I turned around and pushed the door open one last time. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from desperation to terrified anticipation. They looked up as I re-entered, and I saw a glimmer of hope in my mother's eyes, a foolish hope that I had changed my mind, that I was coming back to apologize and open my checkbook wide enough to restore their delusions of grandeur. I walked back to the head of the table, but I didn't sit down. I stood over them, casting a long shadow over the scattered legal papers. Mr. Sterling placed a fresh stack of documents in front of my father. These were not the separation papers. These were the terms of surrender. "I am not sending you to prison," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "Not because you don't deserve it, and not because I have any lingering affection for the people who treated me like a servant in my own home. I am doing it because I refuse to let the family name, the name that is now attached to my business, and my reputation be dragged through a criminal trial. I will not have headlines about my parents being fraudsters and my sister being a violent felon. My father let out a breath he had been holding, his shoulders sagging in relief. "Thank you, Zora," he wheezed. "I knew you had a heart. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. Do not mistake this for mercy," I interrupted him, my tone freezing the gratitude on his face. "This is damage control. And it comes with conditions. Strict, non-negotiable conditions." Mr. Sterling flipped the page of the contract. "First, regarding your living situation. You mentioned the bank has foreclosed on the house. That life is over. The country club memberships, the leased luxury cars, the dinners at five-star restaurants, it is all gone. I have purchased a property for you." My mother perked up, her eyes widening. "Oh, Zora, where is it? Is it the condo downtown? The one near the park?" I almost laughed. "No, Mother. It is a two-bedroom unit in the East End complex." The color drained from her face. The East End was a working-class neighborhood, honest and hard-working, but gritty. It was loud, crowded, and miles away from the manicured lawns and gated communities she had spent her life trying to infiltrate. "It is safe, dry, and paid for," I continued. "It is in my name. You will live there rent-free as tenants at will. If you violate any terms of this agreement, if you try to contact the press, or if you harass me, eviction proceedings begin immediately. You will have a roof over your heads, which is more than you offered me when I was struggling, but you will not have luxury. You will learn to live within your means." "But Zora," my mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "The East End. What will people say? None of our friends go there. It is so small." "Your friends are gone, Mother," I said ruthlessly. "They left the moment the money ran out. This is your reality now." I turned my gaze to Keisha. She was shrinking in her seat, picking at her cuticles. "And as for you," I said. Keisha looked up, her eyes filled with fear. "I am paying your legal fees, and I will settle the immediate debt to keep the collectors from breaking your legs," I stated. "But this is a loan, Keisha. It is not a gift. You are 30 years old. It is time you contributed to society." "I don't know how to do anything," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You will learn," I replied. "Mr. Sterling has a contact who manages a diner 3 blocks from your new apartment. They are looking for waitstaff. The morning shift starts at 5. You will take that job. Every paycheck will be garnished by 30% until you have paid me back every cent I am spending today." A waitress, Keisha, horrified. "I can't be a waitress. My hands, my back. Zora, please. I can't do manual labor." "You will do what is necessary to survive, just like I did. Just like everyone else does," I snapped. "You wanted the spotlight, Keisha. Now you have to work for it. If you refuse the job, the deal is off. I pull the funding for your lawyer and you can take your chances with the public defender and the assault charges. It is your choice." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The reality of their future was settling in. A small apartment, public transportation, minimum wage jobs, no status, no prestige, just the cold, hard existence they had always looked down upon. My father looked at the contract, his hand trembling as he picked up the pen. He looked at my mother, who was weeping silently into her hands, and then at Keisha, who looked like a statue of misery. He knew they had no leverage. They were drowning, and I was the only lifeboat in the ocean, even if that lifeboat was taking them somewhere they didn't want to go. "We have no choice," he muttered, his voice defeated. "No," I agreed. "You don't." He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of his signature seemed to echo in the room, marking the end of an era. He signed his name, then slid the paper to my mother. She signed it through her tears, her hand shaking so badly the ink smeared. Finally, Keisha signed a messy scrawl that surrendered her freedom for safety. Mr. Sterling collected the papers and placed them in his briefcase. "The keys to the apartment are with the building superintendent," I said, stepping back. "The moving truck is already at the motel to take your few remaining belongings. Do not come to my office again. Do not come to my home. Checks will be mailed to the P.O. box listed in the agreement." I looked at them one last time. They looked small, huddled together in their grief, mourning the loss of their vanity. I felt a strange sense of lightness. The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. All that was left was pity for three people who had had everything and lost it because they didn't know how to value what mattered. "Goodbye," I said softly. I turned and walked out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the marble floor, a rhythm of freedom. I pushed open the glass doors of the building and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the city. The air tasted sweet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen of a new life, a life that was finally completely mine. The final eviction day arrived with a cruel kind of sunshine, the kind that makes tragic things look even sharper and more pathetic. I parked my car 3 houses down, shielded by the shade of an old oak tree, and watched the end of an era through my tinted windows. There were no professional movers with crisp uniforms and efficient trucks. There was just a rented U-Haul van parked haphazardly on the manicured lawn, leaving deep tire tracks in the grass that my father used to obsess over every Sunday. The neighborhood had noticed. Of course they had. In a community like this where status was the only currency that mattered, a fall from grace was a spectator sport. I saw Mrs. Gable from next door standing by her hedges pretending to prune roses that were already dead, her eyes fixed on my parents' driveway. Across the street, the Homeowners Association president was washing his car for the second time that hour, watching with a look of smug satisfaction. These were the people my mother had spent her entire life trying to impress, the people she had gone into debt to keep up with. Now they were watching her pack her life into cardboard boxes, whispering behind their hands about the scandal, the bankruptcy, and the shame. My father was struggling with a heavy armoire, his face red and sweating. He looked 20 years older than he had just a month ago. His posture, usually so arrogant and upright, was bent under the weight of his failure. Keisha was trudging back and forth from the house to the van, carrying piles of clothes that were too expensive for her new life. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like a ghost of the girl who used to rule this town. Then I saw my mother. She was coming out of the garage carrying a box that must have been stored in the attic for years. The bottom of the box gave way, and old dusty items spilled out onto the driveway. Old toys, broken picture frames, and stacks of papers scattered across the pavement. She fell to her knees trying to gather them up, her movements frantic and jerky. Among the debris, she picked up a small blue notebook. Even from this distance, I recognized it instantly. It was my diary from high school, the one I had hidden under my mattress, the one where I had poured out every ounce of my loneliness and pain. I had left it behind when I moved out, assuming it had been thrown in the trash years ago. I watched as she wiped the dust off the cover. She opened it sitting there on the hot concrete surrounded by the wreckage of her material life. I knew exactly what was written on those pages. She would be reading about the night of my 16th birthday, when they went out to a gala dinner with Keisha and left me home alone with a frozen pizza. She would be reading the entry where I described how it felt when she told me I wasn't pretty enough to wear the family pearls. She would read about the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't good enough, why I was the mistake and Keisha was the miracle. I saw her shoulders stiffen. She turned a page and then another, reading faster and faster. Her hand flew to her mouth. Even from 50 yards away I could see her body shaking. She wasn't just crying, she was wailing. It was the sound of a woman who had finally looked in the mirror and seen a monster staring back. She clutched the book to her chest, rocking back and forth on the driveway. She looked around frantically, scanning the street as if hoping I would magically appear so she could beg for forgiveness, so she could rewrite the past 30 years. But I didn't step out of the car. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a desire to run to her and comfort her either. I just felt a profound emptiness. Her tears were real, I knew that, but they were tears for herself. She wasn't crying because she hurt me. She was crying because she had lost the only child who could have actually saved her. She was crying because she realized she had bet on the wrong horse and now she had to pay the price. Keisha walked over to her, trying to pull her up, but my mother pushed her away, still clutching my diary. My father just stood by the van staring at the ground, defeated. They were a portrait of absolute ruin. I watched for another minute, letting the image burn into my mind. This was the closure I hadn't known I needed. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their permission to be happy. Seeing them broken by the weight of their own choices was enough. I started the engine, the low hum of the luxury car vibrating beneath my hands. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see them disappear into the distance. I turned the corner, leaving the street, the house, and the family that had never been mine behind. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the steering wheel. The money from the sale of the mansion hit my account 2 days later, and looking at the number on the screen gave me a strange sensation. It was a fortune to most people, but to me it looked like the sum total of my parents' vanity and my sister's entitlement. I knew I couldn't spend it on cars or jewelry or a bigger house, because that money was tainted by the years of neglect that had occurred within those walls. Instead, I decided to scrub it clean by using it to build something that actually mattered. I launched a venture capital fund specifically designed to support Black women entrepreneurs who had the talent but lacked the access to capital. I wanted to be the person for them that my family never was for me. I wanted to be the one who said yes when the world said no. I needed a headquarters for this new vision, something open and filled with light, so I bought a dilapidated warehouse in the arts district that had good bones but needed a lot of love. I put out a request for proposals for an architect, and after reviewing a dozen portfolios, one caught my eye. The designs were bold, but sustainable, modern, but rooted in history. I set up a meeting on site. When I walked into the dusty, echoing space of the warehouse, a man was standing by the large industrial windows with his back to me. He was tall, with broad shoulders, filling out a simple navy button-down shirt. He turned around as he heard my heels on the concrete, and the air left my lungs for a moment. It was Marcus. We had met briefly in the Maldives during my month of solitude. We had shared a drink at the hotel bar one evening, talking about books and jazz for an hour before going our separate ways. I hadn't expected to see him again, but there he was, holding a roll of blueprints and smiling a smile that reached his warm brown eyes. "It is good to see you, Zora," he said, his voice deep and steady. I didn't know the mysterious woman from the island was also the city's newest investor. The business relationship began with a professional respect that I found incredibly refreshing. Marcus wasn't intimidated by my success, nor was he looking to exploit it. He was already successful in his own right, running a firm that was changing the skyline of the city. As we worked together, turning that old warehouse into a sanctuary for innovation, I found myself looking forward to our site visits more than anything else in my calendar. One evening, after a long meeting about structural reinforcements, he suggested we get dinner. It wasn't a demand, and it wasn't a transaction. It was just an invitation. We went to a small, quiet bistro where the tables weren't crowded together and the music was low enough to actually hear each other. Dinner with Marcus was the complete opposite of dinner with Julian. Julian used to order for me, correct my posture, and spend the entire meal checking his phone or looking around to see who was watching us. Marcus put his phone away. He asked me questions about my vision for the fund, about my favorite authors, about what made me laugh. He listened when I spoke, his gaze unwavering, making me feel like I was the only person in the room. When the bill came, he paid it without a flourish, without making a scene, just a quiet, confident action of a man who takes care of things. We started seeing each other regularly after that. It was a slow burn, a relationship built on the solid ground of friendship and mutual respect. There were no grand gestures of apology, because there were no grand acts of disrespect. There was just peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't trying to earn love or buy affection. I was just being Zora, and miraculously, that was enough. 6 months into our relationship, we were sitting on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. I had a glass of wine in my hand, and his arm was draped comfortably around my shoulders. It was one of those perfect moments where everything feels right in the world. He turned to me, his expression growing serious but soft. You know, Zora, we have been together for a while now, and I feel like I know your heart and your mind. But you never talk about your people. I know you are from here, but I have never met your parents or your siblings. Do they live in the city? I stiffened slightly, the old reflex of shame trying to rise up. I thought about the text message. I thought about the scene in the lawyer's office. I thought about my mother crying on the driveway, clutching my diary. I thought about the small apartment in the East End, where they were now living consequences of their own making. I took a sip of wine, letting the liquid calm my nerves. I looked at Marcus, at the kindness in his eyes, and I knew I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to hide the scars anymore, because they had healed. I don't have a relationship with them, I said quietly. He didn't push. He didn't ask for the sordid details. He just waited. I looked out at the skyline, feeling the strength of the woman I had become, the woman who had built a life from the ashes of betrayal. I am an orphan, I said finally, my voice steady and sure. In a way. The garden behind our restored warehouse was strung with cafe lights that looked like captured fireflies against the twilight sky. There were no assigned seats, no 7-course meal that nobody wanted to eat, and absolutely no press photographers lurking in the bushes. It was just 20 of our closest friends, people who knew us, not for what we had, but for who we were. Marcus stood up, tapping a spoon against his wine glass, and the sound cut through the gentle hum of jazz playing in the background. He didn't make a speech about how I completed him, or how I saved him. He simply thanked everyone for being the village that supported us, and then he looked at me with that steady, grounding gaze and asked me to build a future with him. The ring was simple vintage gold and sapphire, completely different from the flashy diamond Julian had bought with stolen money. It was real, just like the man holding it, and just like the life we were building together. Everyone cheered, raising their glasses in a toast that felt warm and genuine. I looked around the table at the faces of the women I had helped fund through my business, at the artists Marcus worked with, and I felt a profound sense of belonging. This was the family I had chosen, the family that had chosen me back. There was no obligation here, only connection. Miles away across the city, in a brightly lit discount supermarket, the air conditioning was blowing too cold and the floor was scuffed from thousands of shopping carts. Keisha was scanning items with a rhythmic mechanical beep that had become the soundtrack of her life. She looked older now, the softness of her privileged life worn away by double shifts and the constant worry of rent. She wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore, just a polyester uniform vest that hung loosely on her frame. She paused to wipe her forehead, pushing back a stray hair that had escaped her hairnet. As she reached for a pack of gum near the register, her hand froze. There in the rack, sandwiched between gossip tabloids and TV guides, was a copy of Forbes magazine. The cover featured a group of diverse women under the headline, Innovators of the Year. And there, in the center, wearing the white linen suit I had bought the day I returned from the Maldives, was me. My name was printed in bold letters right next to the title of my venture capital fund. Keisha stared at the image, her fingers lingering over the glossy paper. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at the sister she had betrayed, the sister who was now soaring while she remained tethered to the ground by her own choices. She looked at my smile, which was confident and free, a smile she had never seen when we lived under the same roof. A customer cleared their throat impatiently behind her, and she flinched, dropping her hand back to the scanner. She went back to work, the image of my freedom burned into her mind, a reminder of everything she had thrown away for a lie. People love to quote that old saying about blood being thicker than water. They use it as a weapon, a guilt trip to keep you tethered to people who drain your spirit. But they forget the full quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds you choose are stronger than the ones you inherit. I used to think I was broken because my family didn't love me. Now I realize I was just an organ transplant that didn't take. I was healthy tissue trying to survive in a body that was rejecting me. Sometimes you have to cut off the necrotic part to save the rest of the life. You have to amputate the toxicity before it spreads to your heart and kills the person you are meant to be. It is painful and it leaves a scar, but that scar is proof that you survived. I think back to that day at the airport, the day I turned around and walked away from the wedding. I lost $35,000 on that non-refundable trip to the Maldives. It was a staggering amount of money to lose in a single second. But looking around my garden at the man who loves me for me, at the friends who cheer for my success, and at the peace that settles in my chest every night, I realized something. That $35,000 wasn't a loss. It was the price of admission to my own life. It was the cost of buying back my dignity, my future, and my soul. And honestly, looking back now, I realize it was a bargain. Thank you for listening to my story. If you are currently holding on to a relationship solely because of shared DNA or shared history, I hope my journey gives you the courage to evaluate what it is truly costing you. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose yourself. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience and finding your true path. Share this with someone who needs to know that it is never too late to start over. Leave a comment below telling me about a time you chose your own peace over someone else's expectations. Remember, your life belongs to you and it is the only one you get, so make it a good one. True family is defined by loyalty and love, not just shared DNA. Zora's journey teaches us that walking away from toxic relatives isn't an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. We often fear the cost of starting over, yet we forget the far higher cost of losing ourselves to someone else's dysfunction. That financial loss was simply the ransom paid for freedom. You must be brave enough to prune the dead branches from your life, no matter how deep the roots go, to finally let the sunlight reach your soul and allow you to bloom. If you have ever had to choose your own peace over your family's expectations, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your story of resilience in the comments below.